Views expressed are not endorsed by the United States Department of Defense or its components. Welcome back to the Flower Podcast. As part of USAFA Aviation today, we are privileged to have Major Alex Auggie, Arcidiacono, with us today. He is the executive officer and TG-16 instructor pilot at the 70th Flying Training Squadron, U.S. Air Force Academy, Colorado. He directs all executive correspondence for the Reserve Unit Commander in support of the Academy's airmanship mission, and is an instructor pilot for the largest sailplane operation in North America.
After graduation from the Air Force Academy in 2013, Major Arcidiacono attended pilot training at Vance Air Force Base, Oklahoma, and upon completion was selected to fly the C-17 Globemaster III at Joint Base McGuire-Dix Lakehurst, New Jersey. Following this assignment, Major Arcidiacono was chosen to return to the Air Force Academy to serve as a T-53 instructor pilot with the Powered Flight Program. During this time, he instructed cadets on the fundamentals of aviation, while also serving as the Group Executive Officer for the 306 Flying Training Group. Additionally, he volunteered as a coach for the Division I water polo team and as an Associate Air Officer commanding for his graduated Cadet Squadron 7. Upon completion of his tour, he was reassigned to Travis Air Force Base, California, where he served as a C-17 instructor pilot and Assistant Director of Operations, where he was nominated as Operation Alley's Refuge Star Performer and led support operations for Travis Air Force Base's surge response to Ukraine invasion. Prior to his current position, he deployed as the Chief of Safety at the 386th Air Force Expeditionary Wing, Ali Al-Salim Air Force Base in Kuwait. Major Arcidiacono has flown missions in support of Operations Inherent Resolve, Freedom Sentinel, and Allies Refuge. Major Arcidiacono is a senior pilot with over 2,300 flight hours in the TG-16, T-53, T-51, T-6, T-1, C-17, and the B-737.
Let's fly gliders, sir. Welcome to the show.
LFG, congrats.
So, C-17 pilot by trade. So, I guess we'll talk flying career opening up. Distinguished flying cross for everybody out there. We'll get to that. But first off, let's just talk about what has helped you most prepare for long missions in the C-17.
Yeah, absolutely. So pretty much the opposite. I think what you do, cramming before a GR, not before I get it. We've all been there. So it's all about the prep and being organized. So C-17 mission, you're normally in charge of a crew as a aircraft commander for 2 weeks, leading a bunch of folks across the world. And so day one, you gotta start on a strong foot. And so it's like first impressions are everything. If you show up as an aircraft commander with not organized, a little bit of confusion, then the team really doesn't gel from the beginning. I think most C-17 pilots would agree that it's really difficult to get out of home station on time because there's a lot of gear you got to take. There's a lot of preparation. There's most likely maintenance issues or upload issues that you're having to deal with. And so that day prior, that mission planning day, prepping from admin stuff to flight stuff to food and sleep cycle considerations, you got to get that all jiving with the crew so everybody's on the same page. So when you show up, it's game time and you're ready to go and execute.
Yeah. So when you talk about establishing credibility with the crew, how often when you're going to go on those 2-week missions across the world, how often do you know those people and have worked with them before? Is it always typically you don't know everyone within your squadron?
So we don't really do hard crews from home station. So it's normally people from the flying unit that you do serve with. And so, there are some folks that get to do multiple iterations of missions because while one crew is on this mission set, you return and you got to immediately go back out the door and you already had a crew assembled from that previous 2 weeks that you went out. So you may go turn again and fly with the same folks. But at any sort of wing, there's multiple pilots and other units that may be C-17 qualified. So it can turn into absolutely a hodgepodge of individuals. And then that's not even accounting for sometimes you have people from mobility command or headquarters staff that come down and interfly with airlift units as well.
What was it like being a C-17 pilot during Operations Alley's Refuge?
So first I want to shout out to all of my Moose brothers and sisters that flew C-17 during then. Y'all rode a bunch of athletes, and I couldn't be more proud to be a part of that community. It was a pretty amazing thing to see I feel like it's just a bunch of LeBrons and Kobe's on the court just making things happen, and I was sick to see everybody doing the thing. If I were to describe it, I think there's a lot of adjectives, a lot of words that I come up with for it. Immediately, I think exhausting. I would also say, challenging for sure, and even emotional. It was exhausting. We were flying, 30 plus hours operating with refugees, trying to hack the mission. It was emotional from their perspective. It was not the ideal chapter to close the Afghanistan book on. There's a lot of veterans, a lot of fine servicemen and women that made the ultimate sacrifice in that country, and to depart that country and have it go back to Taliban control was not something that I think any U.S. Military personnel wanted to do. And then looking from the mindset of the refugees, of course, emotions there too. They were being transported to somewhere where they, likely didn't even, most refugees that I flew with didn't even know where they were going, nor could they even speak English. They were waiting for days without food, water, sleep, with young ones. And so it's definitely a complex problem because of just the communication and all of the emotions that were involved in that operation. And so there's a couple vivid memories that come with that I've had, one of them being, people were crying on the radios out there. Also, when you're stepping, you left the squadron after getting your intel brief. I'll never forget, the briefer would normally say, hey, and congrats, your brief is already outdated, because it's such a dynamic event that's going on. Maybe check Twitter before you take off, and then you're flying for 3+ hours, and you're like, man, I wonder what's going on the ground when I get there. So dynamic as well. It was intense.
So I assume you were stateside before the whole Afghanistan withdrawal occurred.
Yeah.
And so take me through, you hear we're getting out of Afghanistan, and then eventually get tasked, and what was that lead up like, and what were you were preparing for? Obviously, I don't think anybody was prepared for what was about to happen, but just walk me through it.
All right, so I was up in NorCal just talking to one of my buddies, a Viper buddy of mine that I also played water polo with, and we were talking about it because dude, this is nuts. What's going on? And I was like, and he was asking, dude, are you about to go? I was like, well, I haven't heard anything. I hadn't at that time flown a mission in the C-17 upon my return from flying the mighty T-53 here at your United States Air Force Academy. So I was definitely hungry to get back out in the operational world. And so I hung up the phone with him, and then immediately my DO called, and he's like, hey, how would you like to be a part of history? And I'm like, what's going on? He's like, you're leaving in less than 12 hours, get back. I don't know when you're coming back. And so I was like, okay, for sure. And so then, I texted my buddies like, you won't believe what just happened. And so I ran to the store, got all of my stuff, tried to get as organized as I can. And then next morning I was on a KC-10 over, heading back over to Al Udeid. And when we landed, we're checking Instagram, and then it's those pictures and the videos that I think that you guys may have all seen, where people are hanging on the side of an airplane, throwing things at engines down in Kabul, and we're like, dude, this is nuts. And then we check in, let AMCC know that we just arrived, and the crew that had experienced that Reach crew that took off under those circumstances, we saw them in the AMCC there, and it was like, wow, this is the real deal. They looked like they've for sure seen some stuff, and it was like, all right, giddy up, go into crew rest. We're gonna need you.
Yeah, and so as that all unfolded, where were you when the Abbey Gate bombing happened? Was that prior to this or after? How did you react? How did your team react?
Yeah, so during that, I joked at it a little bit before, but checking Twitter to see, hey, what's going on? Because the president's talking. It's a dynamic environment. It's always changing. And so, the Abbey Gate bombing happened, and I think I was in my room in Qatar when it happened. And obviously, terrible, awful to have that transpire. And so, yeah, my squadron commander flew mission immediately to get those injured folks and out of there, and did some amazing stuff on that mission, saved some lives for sure there. So shout out to Doom for that. But yeah, it was, we were in crew rest about to go on our next run into Kabul when I saw that unfold.
So you talked a little bit about kind of like the heightened like emotions and tensions of the refugees. Was there any like specific like things you did to like try to help manage those so that your crew and you could like still work effectively?
Yeah, so it was just constant checks on each other, really. We got sent out of the door, Travis. We got like a hard crew together, so 3 pilots, 2 Globemasters. We had a flying crew chief with us, and so we did stay, the males, and we did stay in the same room together. And even though we had a female loadmaster, we tried to stay, just gelling, synced up during, after, before each sort of mission, and really just had to ask each other those really tough questions, like, hey, how are you really doing? How are you really coping with what's going on? Because none of us really thought we would be in these circumstances. And so, it was just constant checks on each other and just trying to be a good wingman, as maybe corny as that sounds. But everybody dealt with it differently. And, when we landed back from being there for however long we were, the wing commander met us at the jet and was like, go home for 2 weeks. Like, we have all these resources for you guys for how do you process it, but each individual processes something like that differently. And I think that for years afterwards, people are still trying to like debrief in their mind. Dude, what was that I saw? That was wild. Yeah.
So, I mean, when you talk about having those difficult conversations with each other, say, you ask somebody like, hey, how are you actually doing? They're like, I'm actually doing horrible right now. Like, as a leader, as a pilot in command, how do you approach that situation then to like decide, A, if they want to sit that one out, or if on your side, if you think they need to sit that one out, especially when you're like in a deployed environment like that, instead of just like, hey, you get back and then we're going to deal with it.
Yeah. So fortunately, I was blessed to have an incredible crew. First off, shout out to all of them. Yeah, it was so cool to be a part of such an effective team, and everybody was just super motivated to just get after it. So fortunately for me, I didn't have to deal with a problem set of people not wanting to go, but it inevitably, as a pilot, you have to manage the acceptable level of risk that you're willing to take, whether or not, 20 hours into a mission, someone may feel differently than where they felt at hour 10. So that's where I say like, hey, the constant checks was one thing, but then I've always found success with admitting to my own shortcomings to make myself appear more relatable. I may put on a tough exterior, but I'm by no means perfect. And so I think that's one of my techniques to diffuse people who are, maybe they don't want to like show that, hey, yeah, there's some kinks in the armor that I have right now.
And when we go like just into that a little bit more, like how do you, as like the pilot in command, mitigate risk of like somebody who's not doing well mentally? Whereas like, if we go to great power competition and like people are dying left and right, how do you draw the line of like somebody's not doing all right and for risk mitigation, they shouldn't fly that mission, versus like they just don't want to go into combat? And how do you tell as the PIC or as a leader and differentiate between the two?
So differentiating between, hey, we're not going to go, or hey, we're gonna do this, but we're gonna have to do this in a certain way.
Or how do you approach somebody who's like going through mental struggles with that type of stuff? Whereas if it's like they're not in a good space, so they shouldn't go based on risk management, versus like they are like defying like, I don't want to go to combat.
Yeah, so I think for the latter, if someone's like, yeah, I don't want to go to combat, I mean, you can't really force them to do that. And so those tough conversations have to happen before you depart and find yourself in the stuff, I guess. Before I left, we as a unit, we had those conversations. We had those, I remember one of our briefings, it was like, hey man, like, are you okay with like actually not coming back? Or you're going to send people out that aren't going to be coming back. You gotta like ask yourself that now before finding yourself in that circumstances. And then if it were to be someone who's, you know, maybe not necessarily, they're just like, hey, no, it's a hard no, it's binary for me, it's zeros and ones. If they're like, no, then I think that maybe there's a conversation that needs to take place. And there's limited things you can do as the PIC to manage that, but that's a decision that you need to do. That's why you do operational risk management. That's why you are entrusted with the authority code on and in charge of not only, like, you know, a $300 million asset, but the people in it as well.
Yeah. So
hopefully that answers.
Yeah,
your
no,
question.
it does for sure. Yeah. So
Great question.
kind of going on the same topic, talking about the evacuation from Afghanistan. So the 315th airlift wing experienced a childbirth during flight. So did you have any interesting experiences? Obviously, you were working with hundreds of people who didn't speak English.
Right. Yeah. So no Reach babies. I guess that was the name of the baby. They named him Reach. On any of the Kabul runs that I did, to my knowledge, I think that one of the most challenging missions that we had was we were returning back from Kabul. We had 450 refugees on board, and we were rendezvousing with a tanker over the Persian Gulf, and you know, him flying that rendezvous, and about that time, one of our passengers became unresponsive. It was a 16-year-old Afghan mother, and the Globemasters like responded, you know, second to none. They immediately started providing her medical care, and the way to do that with the ambient conditions, it was so hot. They brought her up into the crew rest compartment to get a little bit of cool air. Hopefully, you know, got her body temperature down, as I alluded to previously. Again, you know, this individual likely wasn't eating, sleeping, you know, caring for kids. You know, this is really complex for what that human was having to deal with. And so, you know, we're trying to treat this medical emergency as we're approaching this really critical phase of flight to remain airborne. And then about that time, we had some unruly passengers that tried to gain access and breach the cockpit. And so we went from having this medical emergency to now we're having this security incident. And about that time, it was just like, you know, me and the other pilots were like, hey, we got to land. Like, we are compromised at this point. And so we did what the C-17 does best, pretty much falling out from the sky. It's pretty impressive how quickly that aircraft can do a tactical descent. And so we expedited our landing into Al Udeid, and the problems kind of continued from there, because for any of my, you know, C-17 folks that were out there flying that, they knew how difficult it was to taxi there, because ground had a really limited picture of what taxiways were even open. And so you land, you vacate the active runway, and you're getting taxi instructions, and you're like, I can't even taxi anywhere because there's this entire airfield is just completely jam-packed with airplanes. And so that was a frustrating thing, trying to coordinate good taxi instructions. Seeing the emergency responders, you have someone who's, you know, on the fritz, and she's struggling for her life. And so we were ultimately able to get clear immediately, rapidly on the medical responders and get her medical attention. And yeah, that was probably one of our most difficult missions. I think that after she got medical attention, I mean, apologies, I think it all blurs together, but I think that then we had like those 450 folks like start a riot on the board, and so we needed to get the SF personnel to contain the issue. Yeah, it was just a never-ending kind of tough mission. And then later on, you know, we didn't think any of it, because we went back into the crew rest. Hey, crew, you know, get some rest. Rinse and repeat. You guys are going out again. And so it's like, okay, yeah. And then after the operation, the doctor told us that, hey, if you hadn't gotten her on the ground that quickly, she would have died for sure. And so it was pretty special to be able to play a good part in saving her life.
Yeah. What do you think some of those motivations were by the people who like tried to basically run the cockpit?
You know, I don't really know. I would presume that there's probably a lot of confusion. I don't know, there could have been a husband involved, or they maybe saw that target of opportunity to gain access. But I will say with that, you know, there wasn't a perfect, all the folks that were on board weren't perfectly screened, and, you know, we were confiscating weapons from them, and, you know, there were bomb threats for some of my other like Moose brothers and sisters that they had to deal with, and some of them were very unsafe to fly. And so whether or not where those individuals fell on that spectrum, I can't say, but it was one of those moments where I was like, where the entire crew responded brilliantly. Everybody knew exactly what role they were going to play, and we executed and were able to mitigate that emergency from getting any worse.
Yeah, and when we talk about the situations, like those people who, you know, we don't know what their motivations were. Is that one of those instances where they kind of were just like released back into the general population, or did the USN partners like seriously look into them and look at the situation and determine what happened with them after that?
I don't know specifically, but I do know that at LUD there was multiple three-letter agencies involved that were rescreening folks, and there were holding camps for known or affiliated, you know, terrorist individuals there.
Can you walk through like more of your response to that? Because you're flying the airplane, so like what role do you
like,
play?
Yeah, what happened? Like,
so yeah, so it was like, so as I said, you know, the Globemasters, they started like pulling up the individuals to try to get her some cooler air, because again, like down in the cargo compartments, you know, it's super hot down there. You got 450 people cargo strapped to the floor, and so, you know, ambient temperature still hot. And so that's what our Globemaster's doing. We had some security forces that were responding to this, you know, the folks that were trying to gain entry. And so those folks were doing that. You had like one of our co-pilots that was also overseeing the security. He was like the additional crew member. I remember, like, you know, the other pilot next to me was like, he was trying to help manage that. And I was like, dude, I have the aircraft and the radios. Like, we are landing now. And I just was like, push the stick over, idle speed brakes. Hey, ATC, like, we're declaring, here's what we're doing. I'm flying, you know, 10 knots under my max speed that I can right now, and we're 330 plus knots. Max, I guess, like, max slowdown sort of stuff. Get on the ground as soon as we humanly can. I don't care, like, about the speed limits. I'm landing right now.
Yeah.
What does the attitude of the airplane look like when you do like an emergency descent?
I don't know what the degrees are, but there's a lot more ground than sky. I'll still tell you that any of like the C-17 flyers can tell you that. Yeah, that thing can pretty much point to like the probably at least 20 degrees nose low. I don't know. You point down until you like overspeed the jet, and then you can catch that airspeed really. So it depends on what airspeed you start out with that descent.
And so this was, I mean, by talking about this earlier, this was the mission in which like you earned the Distinguished Flying Cross. So could you just talk a little bit about that process, when you were notified, and everything after that mission that led up to you getting the Distinguished Flying Cross?
So yeah, our crew, we didn't submit for it. We were, I think there was a whole like board, I think, that a general presided over, with folks submitting for citations for all the insane things and like really impressive things that the entire community accomplished during that time. And so it was probably a year plus afterwards that anybody started getting any sort of acknowledgement for their part in the operation. And so I think that our crew, we just submitted for an air medal, and the general and the board accelerated up to a DSC. And so we were definitely humbled, still humbled to this day. And then there was a ceremony at Travis for it. And recently, so yeah, there's a ceremony at Travis, and then one of the senators there in California put our names into the congressional record, which again was another humbling thing. And then I think that Travis is about to do an exhibit on it and donated my uniform for that. So I think that'll be in the museum now. So extremely humbled, because I just know that the whole entire crew force did such incredible things during that time.
That's a cool story.
So, kind of moving on to a different conflict, how did Travis Air Force Base's response to Ukraine?
So it was a all hands on deck sort of situation for Travis. Travis is AMC's largest base, and so what that looks like is, yes, we have multiple airlift platforms, as well as, the KC-10, which, back then was very involved. I know that KC-10s are gone, RIP, with a 46 coming online, but at that time, Joint Base McGuire was the lead base for KC-46 implementation, so they were, getting rid of those KC-10s. So, Travis was flying. It had the flying training unit for the KC-10, and so all of our airlift assets were going over to UCOM. All of our air refueling assets were going over to UCOM. Travis also has the contingent response squadron, and so we Team Travis were doing a lot of military humanitarian aid. All we can do from a C-17 crew perspective, is double shuttles and one duty day over the Atlantic, taking folks, supplies over to UCOM in support of that, and that was not even, a year after we just got done with this huge chaotic evacuation out of Afghanistan. So it was it's a busy time for Travis.
Yeah. So, you were flying the C-17 on an active duty side of things, and then you kind of transitioned into the reserve role where you are now in the 70th. But now you're flying on the commercial side. And so how do you think your time in the military, flying and non-flying, has prepared you best for flying in the C-7, or sorry, not the C-17, in the 737?
Yeah. So flying the C-17, because it's so capable, you do this large spectrum of types of airlift missions, one of them being flying for the White House military office and flying some really important cargo, really important folks, diplomats, places. And so there's an inherent high level of responsibility, I think, doing any missions. But then when you're really doing AMC's number one missions was provide support for the White House, and you're flying, let's say Marine One, or you're flying the president's limos, you kind of get used to that sense of hey, there's a high level of responsibility here, and I have to have my stuff together. And that would translate to being a commercial aviator, where it's a similar thing. Hey, there's a lot of trust in you as a pilot to get 100+ folks to their destination safely, and so I think that translates really well. Obviously, as a C-17 pilot, you're not just trained to go from A to B. Every C-17 pilot is capable of doing air refueling, low levels, tactical arrivals, departures, assault landings, landing a 500,000 pound plus airplane and a 3,500 by 90 feet wide landing strip, which is insane. More than likely the ground roll is even less than that. So yeah, doing training to that level versus flying just A to B in the commercial aviation realm it's obviously a lot simpler, but the responsibility is still there.
Yeah, in that sense, are you a little bored flying commercial?
I don't think there's any a dull moment flying aviation, even though most folks who aren't into aviation think that planes fly themselves. But as every day is different getting up there. There's always a unique set of problems that you got to respond to, and so while it's probably not exciting as crushing a 70-degree angle bank or just letting that ripping out thrust reversers in the air and dropping to the ground, it's cool. It's every bit of that flying is unique, and the airline definitely treats me well, so I will not complain about that.
I've heard that military aircraft like the C-17 is generally more automated, slightly higher tech feeling in the cockpit. Do you think that's accurate compared to the Boeing 737, or not really? Yeah,
I would say the C-17 is a pretty easy airplane to fly, except for it was really difficult to perform air refueling with and assault landings. Talked a little bit about what assault landings, were like. It's an impressive engineering feat, but then air refueling is really tough from a mobility standard because there's a lot of wake, aerodynamic forces when you get two large aircraft next to each other versus a small fighter kind of getting dragged by a boom. And so while those events are really difficult, the long hauls and the automation is really impressive in that airplane. And, you know, the Boeing 737 doesn't have that level of automation, I would say.
Yeah, I think the fighter guys and gals are going to be offended by that statement, but
no shade.
I guess we'll kind of like transition a little bit to the future of the Air Force. Kind of still on the topic of you flying commercial aviation, though. So obviously, you decided to get out of the active duty military and fly commercial, but still in the reserve. What challenges is the Air Force facing with like retention of pilots? And follow on, what would have made you stay?
What would have made me stay? Wow.
And if it's financial, that's totally fine.
No, so okay. Well, first off, there's a lot. Most people are already smarter than me, and so there's a lot of really smart folks that have analyzed this problem. Think tanks, senior leaders, and I don't envy the positions that they're in as far as, you know, retention. I can see, you know, everybody talks about, you know, the financial implications of, you know, flying commercial aviation or being in the commercial industry versus, you know, the military. Well, most folks don't join the military because they want to make money. It's because they want to serve their country and they want to do something that they can't do anywhere else and be part of something bigger than just themselves. And so that, in addition with, I think that most pilots will say that stability is a really tough thing to deal with from a family perspective as an Air Force aviator, because between TDYs or deployments, that can definitely be a strain on anybody's home life, whether or not they have a family. Again, another really difficult thing for the Air Force to remedy, because as you know, as we progress and the future becomes more complex and geopolitical events just increase, and the Air Force's job is to be flexible in responding to those. I see that both of those issues, whether that's you know, stability or being able to compete financially, it's a really tough problem for the Air Force to be able to solve. So I don't envy the senior leaders that have to make those big decisions, but I will also say that the Air Force has some strengths to play. First off, the airplanes they're sick, dude. Like, Air Force jets are really cool, and they can do some incredible things. And, you know, being a part of a really effective team and doing something that is that important, you are not able to do that in the civilian realm with aviation.
And so what would have kept you in the active duty military?
Try to go past that one. I think that for me it was a personal decision because of just where I was at in my life. You know, I was gone all the time. I, you know, flew to 50 plus countries, and there's just not a whole lot of stability that I was able to see. And so I think that if the world was a tamer place and I was able to kind of get some of that stability back, then I would have stayed in. But I think everybody's just got a different reason, and I'm obviously still serving. So I think that most people were like, man, you gave up, you went to the reserves. I was like, hey, well, first off, most people don't even do an active duty service. Most people will, you know, from the academy would do 5 and leave. And so
5 and dive.
5 and dive, you know. And so I don't know. I'm still affiliated. I still am like really passionate about the service and serving my country, especially like helping you guys out and trying to teach you 1 or 2 things in the gliders, but you probably know more than me about that.
We got to fly sometime. We still haven't flown together.
Yeah, absolutely.
How do you see the role of the C-17 and other mobility aircraft changing in the future Air Force operations in new environments? And do you think there's ever a possibility of drone cargo aircraft?
All right, so we've already been doing it from an AMC perspective for like 2+ years, probably more than that. You know, agile combat employment and multi-capable airmen are all incentives to kind of shift that mindset and shift the way that we employ, you know, our mobility assets, and specifically the C-17. And so while the C-17 can do the tactical and strategic mission, we've seen the pendulum swing a little bit more to that tactical emphasis. That, you know, employment with our fighters, and how do we ingress a contested environment. And so I know we've done exercises. We as the Air Force have been doing those and training to a next level. With that comes a higher acceptable level of risk. And so you talked about, hey, back in the day, it was a little bit more vanilla, not as dynamic as we're seeing with the struggles and problems that the new great power competition will present us with. And so those incentives are one thing. I know that there's been articles on palletized munitions and what that potentially could look like for mobility platforms. And with that, the Air Force has already, dropped munitions from a cargo aircraft. Think about the MC-130 dropping in Moab in Afghanistan. So again, there's new capabilities. There's new ways to employ the cargo airlift platforms, and so I think that we're seeing that now.
Yeah, so kind of follow on about like the conversation about like I believe it's called the X-51A Wave Rider missile. Being integrated into the C-17 just came out this summer. Boeing came out and announced in the Air Force follow-on. But so like from a C-17 pilot's perspective on that, I mean, obviously as we were talking about, you don't just fly point A to point B like commercial aviation typically does. But now like being a C-17 pilot in today's Air Force and going in the future, like you will be called on to possibly employ hypersonic missiles. And with that, our adversaries know that. And so now, not that you weren't a target before, but now it's much more like, I'm not going to say C-17s weren't in the fight, but now you've kind of upped the ante. And so what's your perspective on that from a C-17?
Are you saying, what do I think about flying in an environment where I'm going to be getting more shots taken at me? Is that basically?
Exactly, basically, yeah.
So would it be my first choice? But I think the technology is incredible. I think that the capabilities are incredible, and so are the ground to air, counter air capabilities as well. And so I think there's a lot more to peel back than just a C-17 carrying a hypersonic missile. There's employment considerations, there's network considerations of how can it actually get from point A to B, which I'm not super privy to talk about or really super smart on in general. But I think that is, again, the increased level of risk that we're going to have to take moving forward.
Yeah. All right. So kind of going into our last section before we wrap up here. So you went to Squadron Officer School. We've had a lot of people on here who've gone to Squadron Officer School before. But like, what is it, and what actual lessons did you take away from Squadron Officer School? Or was it kind of one of those things where you're just like, I had to check the box and didn't get a whole lot out of it?
Squadron Officer School is down in Maxwell Air Force Base, Alabama, and you and other captains go there and I guess learn military doctrine. You learn about other AFSCs. It is like there's a lot of networking down there. There's some projects, there's essays, and a little bit of a reunion if you do go to USAFA, so you get to see some friends. As far as like lessons learned, what I learned is be a bro. Be someone that other people want to work with. If you're a positive person that uplifts others, you'll be infectious and cultivate a strong team. Laugh often. The Air Force and the military can, be daunting. It can be really difficult, but if you have that mentality, in service and in life, then I think that, folks are going to want to work with you and they want to be a part of your team. And that's just one component of how to lead a successful team.
Are there any opportunities that you wish you took in your career? Any other directions you wish you might have gone?
So no regrets, but I will say, I think it would have been cool while I was a cadet to do some more jumping. I think that 490 is awesome. I enjoyed it. I know these are your fighting words here. I am LFG. Let's fly gliders through and through. But it would have been cool to be on the Wings of Blue, to just jump in the stadium. I don't know, whatever. That'd be sweet, but I would never exchange that for my experience playing water polo I was able to be part of an amazing team, and as a senior, lead the program to a Final Four finish in the Division I sport. And yeah, that was incredible to close out my athletic career on that note.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you, jumping out of airplane school. I mean, I put in for AM 490. It's our like intro jump program here. What I will say is you're taking shots at not only your current squadron, or like kind of the 94th, but also your old squadron, the 557th, picking the only squadron that you haven't been in as part of the 306 here. I don't know. Well, sir, as we wrap up, right? Ending question. Traditional question here on the podcast. I need a single plane. People will have tried to cop out recently, being like, "Oh, it's the best plane, whichever one you're flying." I need an answer. What's the best aircraft in the Air Force's inventory today, and why?
Well, if you ask Google, I think that it says the F-22. I mean, it's hard to compete with the GOAT, right? It's the baddest jet around. It's pretty sick, and so if like you're gonna ask me what my favorite airplane is,
just what's the best aircraft in the Air Force's inventory today, and why?
I'm gonna go with the C-17 because it's taken me to over 50 countries, it's taken me all around the world, and then my grandfather created the terrain warning system for the airplane. He worked on the Long Beach assembly line. Really smart guy, and so for me, flying that jet, it was a kind of a coming full circle sort of experience.
Well, sick. Sir, thanks for coming on the show.
Appreciate you.
As a reminder, all these episodes are on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify with clips on Instagram Reels and YouTube Shorts. With that, we will catch you all in the next one.